So this is part A of the Khudila television channel broadcast from London. This is part A, and this is 11 o'clock GMT and midday 12 o'clock London local time. What we're doing today in this edition in principle is the same diagnosis of Fleet Street newspapers, world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street newspapers. And the Fleet Street newspapers, of course, include the Daily Mirror, the Daily Mail, and the Murdoch-owned scum, also known as the Sun. And the very right-wing, very Brexiteering, very Little Englandish, corrupt newspaper that used to be called the Daily Telegraph, but has been behaving for the last 12-15 years as the bribing the Daily Boris Graph. And under the pretext of Boris Johnson allegedly writing a column, weekly column, in the bribing the Boris Graph, for which the publicly recorded amount of money that this briber paid to Boris Johnson was at the rate of £250,000 for one column every week. So one column is not more than 300 words on average. And Johnson is on the record as having said that his being paid that amount was peanuts. Remember, that is the amount that £250,000 is not even 1 month, it's a year's salary for most people called journalists in Fleet Street. So there is a complete corruption, brazen corruption going on with this paper. This is the one, the Daily, bribing Boris Graph. And contrary to the formulation of the words, it remains bribing Boris Graph because it publishes things to bolster the political image of Boris Johnson, despite the various pretensions to the contrary. It's not truthful and it's not critical. So we have got and there is a piece about Brenda's son, Andrew's so-called ex-wife, Sarah Ferguson, who has been in the news about a pornographic book that she has written and a news review of that pornographic adventure in the Daily bribing Boris Graph says that she fails to excite the interest of readers. There's a piece in the Daily Boris Graph about the racist regime in Hungary, which is being kind of groomed to leave the European Union by the end of this decade. That's what it's saying. And this paper, the bribing Boris Graph, is full of right-wing, racist content. When we say that this program, the world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street, we literally mean this. There is no program on air that does this. No program broadcast by any of the state broadcasters, mainstream so-called broadcasters. And it includes, as far as you know, all the accessible content, accessible outlets on all the platforms, satellite, internet, and terrestrial. So why we call this the world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street is because it is. Nobody does that, and also the diagnosis is not available. And thirdly, the most important thing is that we diagnose Fleet Street ethically, universally, ethically, and morally. And no broadcaster is in existence, in operation, to provide content that is morally, ethically paramount, or where the morality and the ethics are paramount. And they've got on page 2, the headline is Next Prime Minister Survey. Boris Johnson, Sunak and Air. Rishi top story poll. And what they're saying is that Rishi Sunak is on 31% of Tory voters. Liz Truss is on 12%. Sajid Javid is on 7%. Michael Gove on 4%. Penny Mordaunt on 11%. Dominic Raab on 8%. Jacob Rees-Mogg on 5%. Steve Baker 5%. Priti Patel on 3%, and Tom Tugendhat on 3%. Now, they've got an editorial, so-called, on page 12 of the Scum, and we shall look at the editorial about that. The editorial column has got 3 pieces. It's about the ending of the regulations on travel and an outraged editorial about trolls targeting Sasha Atwood, the girlfriend of the football player Jack Grealish. And one about the ending by Sunak of the furlough scheme. So they are kind of peddling Rishi Sunak as a successor to Boris Johnson as the leader of the Conservatives. And there is another piece for Boris Johnson's current wife, Kerry Simmons. I say current because he has had quite a lot of wives. And it is impossible to be confident that Kerry would be his or will be his last wife. I mean, his pattern is that he has cheated on his previous wives and moved on. And so therefore this is something that by no means is possible to be described as the last of the episode. He may have other episodes. And there is a piece about the alpaca that is facing death by bureaucrat's bullet. That's a piece by Rod Liddell, which is very, very rare, about kindness and compassion. There are just 2 days left to save Geronimo the alpaca. On Thursday, the man from the ministry will be coming around with their rifles, and that will be the end of Geronimo, executed for a crime he didn't even commit. Geronimo lives on a farm in Gloucestershire with his doting owner, Helen MacDonald. He's 8 years old and comes from New Zealand, and he has been under sentence of death for 3 years. Now all his chances have run out, and on Thursday he will face a bureaucrat's bullet. So let's see what the last paragraph says. Geronimo's fate lies in the hands of George Eustace. This conservative government has recently ruled that animals are sentient. This means they have certain rights. One of those, George, is surely a second chance at life. Now, this is actually a typical example of the lack of justice, lack of compassion, and lack of fairness in the so-called judicial system, which is corrupt to the core. This particular 8-year-old animal is being murdered. He's not even sick. And before the United Kingdom signed up to some international charters, the English, because it is mainly English based, legal bureaucracy was 100 times, 1,000 times worse than it is now. And when I say now, I say that within quotation marks, because although the UK officially has, quote, left the international forum, the European Union, most of the kind of treaties that the UK has signed over many issues over the decades are still active, and the impact of the narrative, the internationally derived, internationally kind of founded narrative about the judicial process in the UK, which is based on mainly Little English mentality, they are still active, at least in the general references. And the fact that this particular animal has been sentenced to death for 3 years shows that there is no due process, there is no actual rights for fairness and justice and compassion in the judicial process, which is absolutely heartless and corrupt, and when it comes to animals, when it comes to people of African, Asian origins, it is absolutely cruel. So we call the Labour Party's current state as a politically dead state. When we say that, we mean that. We mean the fact that there is no accountability. There is no recourse for seeking what is universally defined as justice, what is universally referred to as due process, using the English language, but the idea is quite widespread among people concerned with the operation of what is meant by due process. Used to be called natural justice. Although the word justice was there in the phrase, natural justice never really was open to the many. Look up the many and you can see what I'm meaning by the many. The many are now even less able to seek protection of due process in the English legal system. And this woman who is in Gloucestershire, who owns this animal, has been left traumatized for years by the lack of due process and lack of any automatic right to have the decisions, cruel decisions by the government, like this Eustace is in charge of the department or part of the section of the department that deals with the lives of the animals. And the Labour Party's death is in the denial of life-supporting, life-sustaining areas, rights that are violated. The Labour Party is silent. Although Tony Blair was incumbent in the post of leader of the Labour Party and the Prime Minister, when the partially animal welfare supporting legislation was passed, the necessary action commentary and narrative and activities linked to that legislation and the implication have been absent. And this is the feature that actually characterizes the state in the UK. The papers are full of references to COVID-19, but these references are bewildering, blinding, stupefying, idiotizing, and idiotic, because there is no actual kind of consistency in terms of fact and evidence between these items. And it's like free for all when it comes to the so-called editorial decision makers in Fleet Street. Anyone can write anything. Regardless of the actual content, the copy, they can write any kind of headline depending on their own stupidity, ignorance, and reckless disregard for the impact and implications of what they write. So, for example, there are regular features increasingly that refer to the various illnesses being neglected because of the focus being on the COVID-19. That is only true to one kind of extent, because all the, if you like, regular conditions and illnesses necessitating and needing, warranting health care and attention have been neglected for 70 years. This is world exclusive diagnostic statement about the NHS. Nobody else is saying this. If anyone viewing this, wherever they are viewing this, in whatever country, and if they have got evidence to contradict what I'm saying factually, they can of course get in touch only on the facts. But I can say that there is no evidence to contradict what I'm saying, because I'm saying whatever I'm saying on not just a initial primary kind of assessment, evaluation of the facts, but on repeated serious examination of the evidence. Not only is the technical preparation and support and infrastructure of the National Health Service lacking, the personnel, most of the people making the kind of decisions about entry into the system, into the hospital, literally into the hospital, most of the decisions are made by people who are ignorant, prejudiced, and even violent. Many, that is the majority of the people who need to enter premises of the hospitals and National Health Service premises are physically deterred by various obstructions, nothing to do with security. It's to do with senselessness. The bureaucracies are not just confined to what Rod literally is talking about, the animal being about to be murdered on Thursday by a bureaucrat's bullet. The bureaucracies are at the core of the corruption of institutions that are supposed to be there for society and society's benefit in this country, in the UK. And the newspapers, Fleet Street newspapers, are absolutely negligent. They don't care, And they couldn't care less. As with the headlines about COVID-19 and about the rest of the NHS, so are these papers and the editors and the sub-editors, decision makers, indifferent. They couldn't care less. They are not dedicated to giving the evidence-based, truthful facts to the public. And no institution, no campaign exists in this country with the white kind of people that is there to point out the inadequacies, the ignorance, the misinformation, and the plain lies that fill the pages and the spaces and the time of the media. That's the essential evidence, essential fact. So, for example, let's look at HS2 just as an example of waste. As we have said many times about the HS2, which is short for high speed rail. The HS2 high street rail has been used as a channel to transfer money, public money, billions of pounds. So far, it has been used to transfer more than 100 billion pounds of public money to mostly big business contractors, all of whom almost are supporters of the right-wing conservative ideas and ideology. And there is no accountability. And as we have said in the past, the HS2 was obsolete even at the start. And there is no accountability at all. The ones in the Fleet Street kind of outlets, like this occasion, I'm holding this newspaper, and I'm holding this piece, byline to Yasmin Alibai Brown. Our name for her is Yasmin Alibai C. C is a part of the name that we have rearranged based on the evidence of our corruption. Here she is talking about corruption. And on page 22 of the paper, she is saying, Britain needs to clean up its act to be truly great. Now that's a basic kind of statement. Anyone with any sense will agree with that. But she is herself dirty. because she has been given a career from the late 1980s, when she was given the first significant space in what we call New SS, New Statesman and Society, gave her a platform to condemn Muslims for daring to criticize Sayyid Rushdie. And she's a pretentious claimant to being a Muslim, because she doesn't belong to the Shia or the Sunni traditions. She is a member of the Qadiani, not Qadiani, the Aga Khani section, which is very, very tiny and very, very controversial and unrepresentative. But quite apart from her affiliation to this small section, whatever section it is, it's not a major or significant section of the Muslim demography. Whatever she actually belongs to is not what we are talking about. What we are talking about is that she does not tell the truth. The truth about the Muslim community, whatever the part of the demography of the Muslims are under reference. For example, she doesn't belong to any part of the Muslim society that actually adheres to ordinary principles of Islam. That's number one. Number two is that she is not known. She is not known as a Muslim in terms of social contacts. Nobody knows her. Nobody in the Muslim community knows her as a Muslim. And thirdly, she is somebody who behaves as a card-carrying operative against Muslims. For example, in the case of the Trinidadian origin stooge, Trevor, terrible Phillips, she refers to Muslims in the same hostile way that Trevor, terrible Phillips does. Or the other ones do. For example, the one that has been comparatively recent compared to Yasmin Alibaisi, the one that has got a platform on LBC and regularly attacks Muslims generally. These are people that are employed by the corrupt, racist, imperialistic, anti-Muslim main powers in the state. They don't represent the many in the population, and they most certainly don't represent those who are aware of the truth about the various parts of the demography, various parts of the society. For example, the piece in the Sunday Times magazine dated the 25th of July, and byline to this one is the cover, and the piece is written by Christina Lamb, this one. Christina Lamb says that she knows, or she knew, Benazir Bhutto. In fact, she claims that she was in the car when Benazir Bhutto's car, according to Christina Lamb, was blown up. Now, that is a suggestion that she knew Benazir Bhutto so closely that she was with Benazir Bhutto when she was murdered. Benazir Bhutto was murdered. I think the online live kind of broadcast that I saw when Benazir Bhutto was shot dead showed that Benazir Bhutto was standing through a opening of the roof, and she was standing. And when she was shot, the live stream didn't show, as I recall, the car being blown up. It was obscured by various other things, but no explosion was dominant, let's say. But Christine Lam is making that statement to emphasize the depth of her intimacy with a leader, political leader, Muslim political leader. But she doesn't recognize the Muslim society. She doesn't recognize the Muslim contributions whatsoever. It's not just the Muslim that Christine Lam refuses to recognize. She doesn't recognize the Hindus or the Buddhists for that matter. And to that extent, Christina Lam is carrying on the agenda prescribed by Thomas Babington Macaulay. Thomas Babington Macaulay didn't recognize any of the intellectuals, any of the thinkers, philosophers that the Hindu society has produced, or the Muslims, or the Sikhs. He was treating the whole subcontinent as a field to exploit. In his 1830s prescriptions. So he wasn't even recognizing the whole tradition of the Hindus, languages, or similarly of the Muslims. And so therefore, in Yasmin Alibai C, you have a replica of Christina Lam or vice versa. She doesn't recognize the Muslims or the Hindus. That is to say, the people of the subcontinent or the people of Africa. She does recognize nominated role models, nominated by the state decision makers whose agenda she serves. Like, for example, tokens approved by the main kind of decision makers. For example, a man who was raised in Birmingham, I think, and is of African origin through Caribbean background, Benjamin Zafania. Benjamin Zafania is promoted as a kind of citable, acceptable black person of quote culture and whatever. And she, Yasmin Alibai Brown, craftily ingratiates herself to that image. To what extent she personally knows him or whether she has met him or not doesn't matter. What I'm saying is that in the subcontinent, let's say, there are more than 1 billion Hindus. And worldwide, there are more than 1 billion Muslims. And Yasmin Alibai C doesn't recognize either the Hindus or the Muslims. She may mention both, but I'm not talking about mention. I'm talking about serious recognition as equals. So there is no difference between Christian Alam's narrative and Yasmin Ali Baisi's narrative. So when she says that Britain needs to clean up its act to be truly great, she has no kind of ground. She has no right to give any opinion as to what constitutes greatness and what constitutes the opposite. Because she is an opportunist. She is a scripted, programmed, recruited liar and hater, spreader of hatred against Muslims. As I said, when she was first given a platform by the News SS, New Statesman Society, to rail against the Muslims, daring to protest against the attacks on the Muslim society by Saidan Rushdie. So what she's doing is referring to the Greensill lobbyist David Cameron. Because everything she's saying here, for example, this paragraph, old systems based on myths of British incorruptibility are ineffectual. Now, there was never a time that Britain was not corrupt. So she is being stupid and ignorant. Empire, imperialism, and the East India Company and its corruption, and Winston Churchill diverting millions of funds away from the subcontinent at the time in 1940s, causing the massacre, the genocide of the people of Bengal in 1943. These are not old systems, these are the same system. And the idea of British incorruptibility is ignorant, because in the class system, corruption is the core, corruption is the foundation and fundamental basis. And Karl Marx's theory of surplus value is very much corrupt and corruption based. So where did she find these old systems based on myths of British incorruptibility are ineffectual? This is a kind of double-faced idiocy. She calls them myths and then she says ineffectual. So would she accept if they were effectual? Would she accept the myths as more than myths? So she's an ignorant stooge. But what the selling point is that her name, Yasmin, is more obviously identifiable as a Muslim than as a non-Muslim. And her whole kind of ethnic background or ethnic appearances, aid and abet the myth of selling her as an acceptable embodiment of diversity. That is absolutely corrupt. And her stupid paragraph ends, "Let us clean up British politics and make Britain truly great again." Isn't it sick? What she is referring to are the beneficiaries of the class system. They were never great. They were crooks and robbers and murderers. They were never great, and the many were never great, of course. So this is Yasmin Alibai C, who is condemning Cameron, which is something she can do now, but she couldn't do before. She would never have published based on her own findings anything critical of Cameron. Now, here is a piece on page 15 of today's Daily Mail. And it's an item based on a ruling by a racist tribunal judge called Emma Jane Hawksworth, who ruled against this Indian woman or Indian origin woman lawyer, Nirosha Sitirapati. Now, whatever that name is pronounced as, I am not being very confident, but that is the spelling. And it appears that this Nirosha Sitirapati, apart from being single, was noticed as being a lesbian. Now, I have said and will continue to say strictly on the evidence that there is no concept of due process in the English dominated British judicial system, which is not a system, which is a bureaucracy, which is corrupt, unjust, unfair, obstructive, and totally criminally unfit for purpose. And this case that was taken through the tribunal confirms what I have just said. Because the tribunal judge said that this woman was the victim of a series of hostile and discriminatory comments made by this Martin Schmidt, her boss and the firm, that it is the complainant who rushed to file a claim rather than the person who discriminated against her. Now, this is one part of the case, but the other one about the policeman who has been actually found guilty of targeting two youngsters in Birmingham. And it is suggested from the contents that both these youngsters that the policemen targeted were black or Pakistani or Asian. Because Birmingham has got a significant population. Let's see if I can find the actual piece. Significant people from African, Caribbean background and also from the subcontinent, Asian subcontinent, many of them Pakistan and Bangladeshi as well. Now, here on page 4 of today's Daily Scar are the two items. The one on the bottom is Dizzy Rascal. Dizzy Rascal is called a rapper who has been charged with assaulting a woman. And above that one is a piece about this racist who targeted two youngsters. Now, that is not the main point I'm making with this item. The main point is in the last paragraph, which is only a small paragraph, which says, the police watchdog ruled that this criminal policeman, his attacks were not racially motivated. Now let's look at this. Let's pause and look at this. How can a police watchdog or anybody else other than the perpetrator decide as to what the perpetrator's motive was in targeting these people? Because the perpetrator would deny it. I mean, that's the most obvious possible kind of propensity. It says there, the headline says, cops 2 attacks on public. And then the word cop is replaced by thug when he is found guilty. Now the question, first of all, the question is, how does a thug like Declan Jones get into the police as a constable for a start. What do they do when they recruit racists like Jones, Declan Jones? What do the police recruiters do? Do they check anything? Apparently, on this basis, no. So we shall return to Declan Jones, Yasmin Alibai Brown, Christina Lamb in a little while. Let's look at this one from the narcissist, Pierce Moron. Now, Pierce Moron, as we have been saying consistently on the evidence of his behavior, desperate behavior that he has been demonstrating since he was effectively sacked by the ITV under pressure of 50,000 complaints against his behavior, against his cruel comment about people with disabilities, mental health, as an excuse to justify his attack on Meghan Markle. Now, he is claiming that the American black Olympian Simone Biles actually returned to compete after saying she was withdrawing, and is claiming credit for persuading her to return. And they're saying that now it's personal. They're giving the kind of publicity that he craves. And the kind of publicity he craves because, as his wife, Celia Walden, has been forced to publicly plead with television executives, media people, to give him a spot. That has been after she was kind of shown to be posting things about her life with him following his effective sacking by the ITV company. Okay, let's go back to Christina Lamb and Yasmin Alibai C. And Yasmin Alibai C's claim that Britain was great before and it can be truly great again. What time, what era, what centuries is she on about? As I said, the people who made the decisions during the last, let's say, 500 years or 400 years or 200 years, depending which particular era we are referring to. People who made those decisions did the decision making by excluding what is called the many, domestically the many, and by robbing and looting and massacring the people they occupied in the countries in the continents of Asia and Africa. So which of those murders and robbery and looting is Yasmin Alibai C describing as great? She's that stupid. And I'm going by the evidence. So isn't that stupidity the reason for the racists at the I newspaper giving her the space? All right, this is the financial crimes of Tuesday, the 3rd of August 2021. And the cover price is the same as it has been for a while, £2.90 per copy. And there is a piece in the financial crimes about Tunisia, who says that it says angry Tunisians back presidential power grab. And there is a very sick and racist and contradictory piece as well on page 7. And the headline is UBS laments the inequality driving its earnings. How sick can UBS get? It laments the sickest possible travesty and complete dishonesty. And about Tunisia, it says, voters in Tunisia hit by poverty and pandemic back leader accused of staging a coup. We shall not go into details in this particular part, but we shall contextually go into the details in due course, either later in this program or in a later program. And here is a financial crimes. Here is an accurate heading to the editorial. I'm absolutely certain that that accuracy will be completely confounded and exposed as a sham when I read the actual contents. The accuracy bit is Britain's wrong-headed approach to refugees. That is correct. And then it says in the subheading, it should not fall to volunteers to provide routes for asylum seekers. And it says, the first part of the first sentence, first paragraph is this. Thanks to the bravery of volunteers who run towards storms at sea to rescue ships' crews, few British institutions command as much respect as the Royal National Lifeboat Institution. The charity, however, has recently had to negotiate a different kind of storm over its efforts to help refugees who get into difficulties crossing the Channel from France. Nigel Farage, the former Brexit Party leader, accused the RNIB, not a Lifeboat Institution, the RNLI, not RNIB, Royal National Lifeboat Institution, of running a taxi service for the illegal trafficking gangs. Last week, the RNLI said it had received thousands of pounds of extra donations in response. So it shows the criminality of Nigel nasty racist Farage can actually have the opposite kind of response to what he intends. So the financial crimes continues. The RNLI has become embroiled in a now familiar story. When the summer months allow more small boats to make the channel crossing, compared with the flows of other countries such as Spain, Italy, and Greece, only a handful of migrants attempt the journey. That makes the UK's inability to control the border in an effective and humane way and shabby treatment of those who do make it across no less of a scandal. Britain's strategy for stemming the flow has relied mostly on paying the French authorities to limit the number of boats crossing, etc., etc. Now, the financial crimes criminality is in the fact that it doesn't examine the international legal obligations, international constitutional law obligations that the UK has been flouting, breaking, neglecting. So, even though the financial crimes is not like the brazen version, which is the Daily Mail or this scum or the Daily Express or the bribing the Daily Boris Graph. Essentially, the narrative is the same, which is that it is denying the international legal contracts and obligations that the UK is under, which the UK has been brazenly flouting, and which flouting on the facts, on the impact and the implications constitute criminal aggravation of its neglects and negligence. Financial crimes, edited by a woman born in the Lebanon, should have really substantially different contents in the editorials. But they don't. So, although this woman who is born in a Muslim background in Lebanon and is now the diversity exhibit as the editor of the financial crimes, she's no different. She's no different from Yasmin Alibai C. And she's not different, of course, from the likes of Christina Lam. Why? Because the people that the financial crimes editorial is talking about, the asylum seekers, are direct victims of the racist occupation of Afghanistan, Iraq, and other parts of the world. These are the people who have to seek refuges and asylum. And in her stupid piece about Britain becoming great again, Yasmin Alibai C is totally lost in the sea of ignorance that she finds herself in, put there by her racist, imperialist, anti-Muslim criminal endorsers and commissioners. This is why you are watching World Exclusive Diagnosis of Fleet Street, which is world exclusive diagnosis of the corrupt policymakers and post holders in the state of the UK, and ex-post holders like the crook, David sleazebag racist criminal Cameron. And she is not even remotely recognizing the daily denials of legal and lawful rights and claims and benefits, denials to the people of African origin or background, people of Asian origins and backgrounds in the UK. By that I mean in the various transactions, various kind of dealings and decisions that are made in the name of the local areas by the local councils. They're completely unaccountable. There doesn't exist anything in the form of real redress being available to the people denied the rights and services by the local councils. Which is why we have this week demanded the scrapping of the councils. And we have done so in view of the latest revelations, which we call admissions by the so-called authorities about the decades of criminality, sexual abuse and exploitation, and cruelty done to children, allegedly in places that were supposed to be supervised and caringly looked after by the relevant local council, which is the London Borough of Lambeth. When Ted Knight was the leader of the Lambeth Council, he was almost every day featuring in news in Fleet Street that was actually hostile because of what Fleet Street said Ted Knight's far left tendencies. Here is the rejection of that again. There is no local council. There has been no local council since these councils were created in April 1965. That is led by genuine socialist. There has never been no record. What there are and what there have been are local councils fronted, because the leadership concept, the concept of leadership is something that needs to be extensively dissected. The fact that somebody is called leader does not mean they're leader. It means they're fronting a cabal, a group, and that person is called the leader of the group in the sense of being at the front, not leader in terms of the agenda, in terms of the actual decisions, in terms of the actual impact on the people. So let's go back to 1965. And in April 1965, the London councils were formed, councils as they are known now. They're called LBC, that is London Borough Council. With the exception of the name of the City of London Corporation, all the 31 boroughs are called LBCs, that is London Borough Councils, which is the Greater London altogether. Since that time, there has been no democracy delivered to the local voters, electors, the local communities. There has been robbery of democracy, robbery of a say on the council's behavior on the part of the people who are the demography, the electors and the communities. And there is nothing in the way or by the way of holding these councils and their cabals accountable by applying objective international unbiased criteria. There is the bureaucratic outfit called the local government ombudsman, which is itself a corrupt outfit. And if you go to the tribunals, you go to the local county courts and the local high court, court of appeal, etc., there is no access. There is absolutely no access to the many to seek remedies against the wrong behavior of the councils, wrong behavior of the councillors, wrong behavior of the council as a whole, wrong behavior of the council department sections. As we have pointed out in the last 48 hours, the staged trial for housing fraud of the Poplar and Limehouse quote MP, Afsana Begum, has been followed by total absolute silence by the so-called prosecutors, that is the Tower Hamlets Council, about the fact of the persistent fraud and corruption in the housing operations of the council. There has been no mention of the same during the so-called proceedings in which the prosecutor, the Tower Hamlets Council, was represented by a licensed law trader called James Marsland. He didn't make any point whatsoever. And most certainly and predictably, the woman from the Matrix Chamber of Barristers, called Helen Laws, was absolutely thrilled by the fact that she didn't have to talk about the predominant corruption in housing in Tower Hamlets Council and how it impacted the lives of the absolute majority who are being denied housing service by the council. And housing in Tower Hamlets in particular is worse than a scandal, as we have been saying, exclusively, in the period, let's say 2003 to 2010. The housing stock, the council housing stock that was owned by Tower Hamlets Council was robbed, looted by Tower Hamlets Council. Think about that. And the looter in chief was John Prescott. Now, Prescott has made a career of being wrongly described as a working class ship's crew in his career, but actually made his career as an MP by claiming that Prescott is not a champion of what is called working class culture in politics. And this was proved by him being employed as Tony Blair's stooge. Because like Yasmin Ali Bai C, like Priti Patel, like Trevor Terrible Phillips, these are, unlike Joan or Jane Saprong, June Saprong, these are diversity exhibits. These are symptoms of the disease of racist exclusion and denial and corruption. Prescott was, for the many, the working class so called, the exhibit for Tony Blair, who is an enemy of the working class values and working class claims and working class entitlements that have been suppressed. What Tony Blair did with John Prescott was to tell the Tower Hamlets Council, which was Labour run or Labour controlled, to get rid of the council housing stock, which they did. And it's not just worth £64,000, which is the amount that the prosecutors claimed had been caused by Afsana Begum's housing fraud. The loss to the people in Tower Hamlets, the majority of whom are in low income and can never, ever own their properties. The losses amount to billions of pounds. Billions, not £64,000. Billions of pounds of, or billions of pounds worth of social housing or council housing stock was given away to gangs of criminals. Two gangs operating as Harka, Popla Harka, and the other one operating as Tower Hamlets community housing. Now, this is world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street and world exclusive diagnosis of the criminals in the relevant local councils and in the local relevant central government departments. Evidence-based diagnosis, not based on prejudice, not based on an unsubstantiated or unsubstantiable agenda on our part. It's strictly objectively evidence-based. And evidence-based, not only was Popla Harka the crooks gang and Tower Hamlets community housing the crooks criminals gang being given billions of pounds worth of housing, council housing stock. There were other billions of pounds worth of losses inflicted at the expense of the people on the housing waiting list or people relegated to housing waiting lists, let's say, or condemned to overcrowding and condemned to homelessness by Tower Hamlets Council. And we have already extensively detailed in previous programs the Channel 4 role of the Channel 4 television company in broadcasting three separate lots of corruption backing corrupt programs that impacted on the rights of the people in Tower Hamlets, rights to housing, rights to a say, rights to accountability. One was the series called Undercover Boss. Now, Undercover Boss has been a series on Channel 4 that is a pack of lies, a packed lie, a lying package, where they go to a corporation or an organization and they say that they're secretly making a film featuring that person. And then they claim that at the end of the program, they have done a secret program showing the truth about the role of the particular individual who is either the chief executive or some sort of holder of the leading position. Now, the one in particular about Tower Hamlets Council featured this serial career liar called Kevin Collins. Kevin Collins is a former primary school teacher in Tower Hamlets. But because of his corruption, his craft, and his skills at lying, he reached the post of chief executive. And he followed that not long after Christian Gilbert. Now, Kevin Collins is a seasoned liar. When I say these things, I invite whoever is watching this to check what I'm saying by checking the definition, checking the online dictionaries. When I say a seasoned liar, I do mean a seasoned liar. I don't mean something else. Collins was involved, just as an illustration of just how bad he is, or he has been, in promoting the corrupt post of elected mayor. Because when the so-called petition demanding the infliction of a elected mayor post was being orchestrated, a large number of bogus signatures were included in order to boost the number of signatures to the standard required number. And Collins was told that this had happened and that the petition should be rerun. But he refused. The reason was not that he didn't know that petitions had been faked. The reason is that he was part of the fakery, that he was part of the corrupt agenda. So he abused his position at the time as the returning officer, because whoever was in post at the time as the chief executive at the expense of Tower Hamlets Council was also the returning officer. That was the norm. So he abused his position as the returning officer, and he refused to reject those bogus signatories. That was one thing. The other thing is that he manipulated his way into a television program, probably Channel 4 or ITV, one of those, in which he took up or took over, or he kind of became the phantom leader of the council. He was the chief executive. He was not the leader of the council, but he did take up that position. He pretended to be the authorized spokesperson on behalf of the, let's say, council. And he said that an elected mayor would be a good thing. Now, as we have been saying, the elected mayor is a corrupt post, and in the context of Tower Hamlets, it is inevitably doomed to allow a crook to get that post. And it will take 100 years before the opposite happens. That is to say, an anti-crooked, anti-corruption person can get to be the incumbent or get to have that post, because the electorate is unfit to hold the council to account, and the political parties and groupings in Tower Hamlets are totally contaminated and corrupt. And as I said earlier, there is no outfit, there is no organization centrally available in the UK to hold the local councils to account. So, local councils are actually suppressing democracy, and they are an anti-democratic kind of obstruction to the whole of the electorate. And there is no incentive for individual people in poverty and low income and homelessness, uncertainty, lack of employment, lack of security. It is impossible for individuals to take on the task that is, in terms of money, expensive, and in terms of energy, even more expensive. So the crooks in central government, crooks in the council, actually bank on the poverty of the people that prevents the people from challenging the crooks. So the cycle of poverty perpetuates the cycle of the anti-democratic, unaccountable local council, unaccountable parliamentary members. So, what is happening in Lambeth, what is happening in Tower Hamlets, what is happening in Newham, what is happening in other parts of the councils, they've got one thing in common. Regardless of what form the cabal, the fronta is, either the elected mayor or the elected leader of the group, the absence of accountability makes sure that there is no accountability, whatever the form. So Tower Hamlets robbed the housing stock, and Kevin Collins did the two things. One was undercover boss, and the other was the program he did supporting the imposition of elected mayor. And Tower Hamlets Council was also supported in corruptly reducing the council housing stock by Channel 4 running more than 3 separate series called How to Get a Council House. And in all of those series, no elected councillor was featured as speaking about housing needs, housing allocation, housing service, housing priorities, housing obligations, housing policy or agenda. It was a number of criminals employed in the thing called housing options. This is housing options that has featured during the Snaresbrook staged trial of Afsana Begum, who was claimed to have been familiar with the housing options. And all of those programs supported the reduction or denial, total denial of any obligation by Tower Hamlets Council to provide council housing to the people in need in Tower Hamlets. This was a criminal lie. Under all the relevant laws that together make the legal framework of a local council, every local council has duties to people without homes or people in overcrowding conditions. So none of these illegalities has been challenged by any of the councillors, any of the other organizations that supposedly speak for the people. So what happened in Snaresbrook Crown Court about the housing fraud, the staged trial of Afsana Begum, was that it was a staged denial by Tower Hamlets Council of the corruption that it had been running, and the corruption that Afsana Begum took part in. Because, as I said earlier, when the formal trial was declared as finished, Tower Hamlets Council issued a very small statement, and it could not get away fast enough because it didn't want to talk about housing fraud, as I have said, or the robbery of the housing stock, as I have explained, again, updated. It just couldn't stop talking about housing fraud and criminality soon enough. And the same applies to Afsana Begum. Same applies to her ex-partner or ex-husband, currently a councillor in Tower Hamlets, Ehtishamul Haq, no relation of mine. Ehtishamul Haq allegedly is married to somebody else now, another person stated to be a councillor in Tower Hamlets. None of the people featured during the proceedings cannot shut the topic down fast enough. John Biggs, the racist criminal liar, who is in place as the elected mayor currently, nor any of his colleagues. They are all lying. They don't want to talk about the robbery that is going on, that has been going on, robbery of people's rights, housing rights in Tower Hamlets, through Tower Hamlets Council that has been going on. And we shall be updating, elaborating on in due course more. This is the program that is being brought to an end, this part A, at 12:36 hours GMT on Tuesday, the 3rd of August 2021.